Welcome to the Purpose Podcast. My name is Rachel. I'm here with my friend Christina, and we're going to hear her amazing story today. So buckle up. It's about to get wild. There's some crazy stuff. But we want to take just a second to say happy Juneteenth. It's June 19th, and we want to take a minute to celebrate the real end of slavery. We are so grateful that as a nation, we stepped away from slavery, and today we remember that there is still slavery around the world and human trafficking, and that our heart's desire is for unity. So I'm praying that today, as you celebrate Juneteenth, you're also asking the Lord to reveal places in your life where there's division and places where we can experience more unity, and how you can be a part of ending slavery once and for all. So, all right, let's get to it. It's Pride Month, and I just feel like we should just roll right in. Yeah. Let's roll right in. So this is Christina. Why don't you, and we're just going to talk a little bit today about some things that can be harder for people in the Christian walk, because our culture is so intense. Like, it's so focused on sexuality and gender, and we as believers have been called to love God and love people, but sometimes that can be harder for us when people are living outside of God's design, not just like sexually, but then like you think about any practice that's like, hey, this isn't how I live my life. It's really hard for me to connect with and love people who are different from me. So we want to just talk a little bit about how we can make space for the people around us who are different from us, who are wrestling with different things than us, because what we believe is important, but how we believe it can be just as important. So Christina, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, I was born in Knoxville. Had a pretty big family. I'm one of 5. I wasn't really in the church growing up, not until here recently, but when I was younger, I attempted to kind of dive into church and everything, and I kind of had a little church hurt, and you know.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about what it was like meeting Jesus? Would you tell me kind of your testimony about like what it was like to experience God?
Yeah. Well, like I said, so when I was younger, I attempted to go to church. I was probably 15, 16, and so I knew of Jesus, but I didn't know him.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you say like, hey, I attempted to go to church, like what's that mean? What happened there?
So when I went, I was kind of starting to come out. Like, there was a lot of curious thoughts going on. I was in a lot of spaces and areas and groups of like friends in school and stuff where there was just all kinds of stuff involved. And so when I went to church, some of the first things that they were talking about was obviously sin and, you know, things like that. And so I immediately just heard, oh, you're wrong. You don't need to be here. You know, and there were people that kind of just misrepresented him. And as soon as they would find out, you know, that I had these curious thoughts or I had these questions, you know, just questioning things, you know, it's kind of, well, you don't need to ask questions. Or you have these types of questions, we don't talk about that here. I didn't really feel like I fit in. I felt very different. One, because my skin color, you know, in school and stuff, I was one of very few, you know, who had a little bit of tone.
So, the melanin blessed.
Yeah. So I didn't really feel like I fit in anyways. And then going into that space, into church, I really didn't feel like I fit in. My family and I, like, we didn't look like them. Yeah. We didn't dress like them.
Yeah.
And so going in there, you know, you kind of had the stares and the looks, and it was probably also a little bit of misperception also. You know, we were new, so people are going to look like, who are they? That kind of pushed me away, but I was also coming into that curiosity where I was leaning into that curiosity, especially with being gay.
Right, yeah.
And so when they were up there, during the sermon and stuff, and they started talking about sexual immorality, it felt like the finger was kind of just pointed at me because they were just talking about homosexuality. So that kind of drew me back a little bit, and some of the feedback I had got from some people drew me back, and so we kind of just stopped going. But then
how did your parents handle that? Like, were they going with you? Were they not?
So to church, my parents, they went to church with me. I actually went with them.
Okay, yeah.
And this was before I came out to them. So when I came out, it was kind of one of those things where my mom wanted to love me where I was at, but she didn't know how.
Yeah.
And so the first thing was, well, I'm going to beat you over the head with the Bible, and looking back
now.
No, not at all. No, it actually pushed me away a lot more. But, now if you meet us, together, you'd think, you guys have never had any issues. But, we have such a strong relationship now. But, he was working on her, during that time.
Yeah.
But when I came to him, I was actually in a lot of idolatry, So
this is when you met Jesus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. When I attempted to go to church, it was when I was 16. And throughout that time, I ended up dating someone through high school, another woman. And when I came out of high school, I kind of just went wild, completely rebelled against everything that I was raised, how I was raised. And so I actually ended up coming into drugs, alcohol, into these spaces, clubbing, parties and stuff like that. And so that eventually led to other things. And up until I met Jesus, I was practicing witchcraft. I was in the New Age, and then I was actually coming into polyamory relationships.
Will you tell people what that is, because they won't know what that is?
Yeah. So I was dating men and women, and
at the same time.
And it was interesting because I was never attracted to men or to males, and just trying to find something, to fulfill me. And so during the time that I had met him, I was into all of that, in a polyamorous relationship.
How old are you at this point?
This was just 3 years ago, so I'm 34 now. So, yeah.
31.
Yeah.
So I just want to take a second. So you leave your family.
Yeah.
At 18. And you just you're like, hey, I'll go do and experience everything the world has to offer me.
Yes, everything.
I want it all.
Mean, everything. Yeah.
So for over a decade, you have immersed yourself in what the world has to offer.
Yeah.
Which, not all of it felt bad.
No, no, not at all.
And it's some of it really well. Hey, I felt better, or I had these moments where I was like, oh, I'm really thriving. But you you experienced this for 13 years.
Yeah.
And then you have this radical moment. So why don't you tell us what happens?
Okay. So I was actually at a friend's house, and we were partaking in things. and I always use these things because I was deep into my spirituality, but it was the dark side of it. Wasn't, it was the counterfeit. And so when I was partaking in certain things, I was like, oh, it's getting me connected to the universe. Instead of God, it was the universe. I was worshiping creation instead of the creator. And there was a point where, I just felt like something didn't really feel like it usually did. I actually went into a bedroom, and I was sitting in bed, and the stuff that I was partaking in, it was like, I knew what it felt like. I knew what it felt like to have a negative experience and a positive experience, or what I thought was a positive experience. But this didn't feel like any of it. And it was like I wasn't of sound mind, and then it was just like a snap. I had sound mind. It was like I was completely sober. And I'm like thinking to myself, well, that stuff was either really bad, it was kind of a dud, or something else is happening. So I was sitting there and everything went dark. Like I said, I was partaking in the New Age, practicing witchcraft. I was into necromancy, so communicating with spirits. I thought that they were my past loved ones, other people's past loved ones. People would come to me to, try to speak to their ancestors or their past friends or loved ones. And so during that time when everything went dark, I'm just like, well, this is weird. I felt,
because that's not what your experience was normally like when you were messing with the spiritual stuff.
No, not at all.
What would you just for a second, because I think some people were like, well, what were you experiencing when you did engage with that stuff?
Oh yeah, it was like, I called them spiritual narcotics, because it was like I was on a high and I was getting knowledge and all of this stuff that I wouldn't have known on my own. And so, it was very intriguing, So
it didn't feel really dark.
No. Mm-mm.
So all of the sudden you're having this, like, all of a sudden I'm sober.
Yeah.
I should not be sober right now.
Yeah.
And you're starting, like, the space you're in, like, just goes dark, which is not like any spiritual experience you've ever had.
Well, it was the false light that I was experiencing, but I didn't know that it was false. And, I've had such a positive experience. Like, why are you doing this to me now? And as they were mocking me, there were two, and they kept, it was kind of like a demonic, hysterical laugh, like laughing at me because of, where I was.
Yeah.
And I remember them saying, she doesn't get it yet. And I was like, what don't I get? So it was like concept of time did not exist at that point. And I'm trying to wrap my head around like what's going on. Like you said, because I haven't had this type of experience before. I was met with almost every wrong that I had ever done. I didn't really know what sin was, but it was like I was met with everything. It was like a cognitive dissonance. Like I was so confused. Like, this is good. Why is this appearing this way now? And so as I was experiencing that, I started asking questions like, what is this? Why am I here? What is happening? Because it felt like I could feel everything in my body. The way it started was like my chest was just like my heart was pounding out of my chest. And I thought I was having a heart attack or something, thinking that, okay, well, this is it. I'm dying. And it was almost like an out-of-body experience. Like I could feel everything going on in my body, but
it's like you weren't there.
But I wasn't there.
Right.
Yeah. But I was watching myself at the same time. And in the New Age, there are things that, like some practices that they do to try to pull you out of that, to be in the spirit realm, and uninvited. And so I thought, well, I've attempted to do this before, but I'm not attempting right now. And here I am feeling like I'm being drawn out. And so during that time, I didn't have the control. And I thought that I had all the control. I thought that I controlled what went on around me. I thought that I was, the creator of,
your space.
Yeah. Because what I was practicing, it was bringing me into making myself my own God. But with all that stuff, like kind of just coming over and over and over again into my my vision of like, this is what you're doing and this is what you've been doing and this is who you are or who you've attempted to be. I was like, okay, I'm trying to logically understand what is happening. And I'm like, I'm either dead or I'm dying. And so that's when I started kind of like freaking out, like, oh no, and so that torment, when I started asking those questions, like, what is this? What is happening? What is going on? What am I experiencing? It was like for a brief moment, I realized this is hell. So in that moment, you know, I started crying out. For the first time, I cried out to him, and I'm like, God, no, like, please, I can't be here.
Yeah.
You know, I thought I was going about life, you know, the right way. You know, I thought I knew, you know, right from wrong, but, you know, I was obviously deceived. And, you know, in that moment, as I was crying out to him, you know, I worshiped Buddha. I worshiped Hindu gods, goddesses. I was worshiping myself. I was worshiping all these different idols and false gods. But none of them showed up. None of them showed up, you know, except for one, you know, the one that I wasn't worshiping, you know, the true living, you know, Messiah, Jesus, like Yeshua. He showed up. He came in, and it was like he plucked me out of where I was, plucked me out of that darkness. And then I found myself what I could understand between heaven and hell. Yeah. You know, like, standing there, like, it's like I could see, you know, light and, you know, just beauty and paradise and, you know, true love on one side. On the other side, it was just, you know, gruesome and dark. And so I just felt like I was standing there kind of like in between them, and like there was a choice I had to make. And that was the first time I actually heard the voice of God. And, you know, it's like he was speaking into me, and he was saying, you have to make a choice. Like, you have to make a choice. And at that time, I thought, okay, well, you want me to choose between heaven and hell. Well, if that's anything compared to hell, I don't ever want to go back there. Yeah. But really, he was wanting me to choose him, you know, obviously. And so, but I didn't know that at the time. And so I was like, you know, I choose this side, not that side. You know, I choose this, not that. And I hear him say to me, well, you need to make different choices. One of the biggest things that I remember him saying was, remember who you are. Like, over and over, just remember who you are. Remember who you are.
But at that moment, you had no idea who you are.
No. I was trying to find myself in the world and everything. You know, trying to fulfill, you know, that God-sized hole that I had, trying to fill it with women and men and drugs and alcohol and, you know, these spiritual practices and these beliefs, and none of it came close to him. You know, and so for the first time I experienced him, I encountered him.
So, like, I'm just going to recap, make sure we're all together here.
Yeah.
So you're at your friend's house. You're using drugs. You're supposed to be high. All of a sudden, you like lose your sobriety. Yeah. Or I mean, like, you lose your high. You're totally sober. Yeah. And you call your girlfriend at the time, and you're like, hey, I'm just going to chit chat. And you get off the phone, and all of a sudden the room goes dark. You're exposed to the reality of the spiritual things you'd been dabbling in for a hot minute. And you hear the voice of God say, hey, he gives you this picture of what it is to experience hell and what it is to experience heaven. And all of these, like, pow, who knows how long, like, you're like, the concept of time. Yeah. Like, gone. Yeah. So you have this experience. For all intents and purposes, I am a gay witch in East Tennessee. Yeah. Yeah. Of Mexican descent. Yeah. Let's just throw all of the, like, I've just experienced the living God. What did you do?
I actually didn't get off the phone with her. She was on the phone with me during this whole time? This whole time. I felt like I was having heart surgery.
But that's not where you were. You were you were in the same room.
Yeah. And I felt just this embracement that I had never felt before. And the best way that I can describe it is, like, you know, when a mother has a child, the first time that they embrace that child, that's what I felt. And I now know that it was him pouring his love out onto me.
Yeah. And you're being made a new creation.
Yeah, like, literally. And I didn't know that.
Because you said, hey, I choose that side. Yeah. You didn't know in the moment, like, I am choosing to follow Yeshua. Yeah. I am choosing to follow Jesus. No. But you're like, I want that. Yeah. So you literally, because this is hard for some people, especially when it comes to conversion experiences, because they say, hey, well, if you don't meet Jesus a certain way, then you're not really saved, or there's some things. But what you're describing is, I mean, if you look at Jesus on the cross, and like, there's the thief next to him, and he's like, hey, today you're going to be in paradise. That's like, he never prays his prayer.
Yeah.
He doesn't, follow these steps. So you just have this moment where you say, well, that's it for me. I'm going to do that. Mm-hmm. And you literally experience being made a new creation right there.
Yeah.
Experience the love of God. Mm-hmm. And you come to.
Yeah, I did. It was like everything kind of started evaporating, per se. And I'm just sitting there and I just felt like I needed to cry. And I just wept and I just cried. And, but it wasn't
a bad cry.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is the enemy was right there waiting.
Yeah.
Like right there waiting. After I had this whole experience with God, the enemy was right there just ready to pounce on me, just mm-hmm. ready to come back in and try to pull me back into, what he was doing.
Yeah.
And because by the end of it, I heard a different voice, and it wasn't the voice of God, but it was the voice of the enemy saying, there's no good or evil. Or, there's no bad. There's no good. Like, there is no God. You are God. And I'm like, well, if there's no God, then how am I God? And so I'm like, what you're saying doesn't even make sense. And then I hear you can do whatever you want, do what you will, whatever you want to do. And I knew, I just had this experience. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to. But when I came out of it, I was just sitting there with myself, and I was still on the phone with my girlfriend, and I just looked at her and I was like, I immediately knew this was one of the things that I needed to let go of.
It's super similar. I don't know if you've ever read Jackie Hill Perry's book, Gay Girl, Good God.
No, but I've heard a lot.
So good.
Yeah.
And she talks about when she gets saved, it's this incredible, which I love. Mm-hmm. I love Jackie Hill Perry.
Yeah.
And she talks about a similar experience where, she gets saved. She's, in her room. She'd been smoking weed earlier. Mm-hmm. And she's in her room. She's, I think she said she's 19. And she knew, hey, she's still gay. She's still same-sex attracted.
Yeah.
She gives her life to Jesus, but she knows, hey, I've got to break up with my girlfriend. Mm-hmm. And wrestling with this feeling of, hey, I've chosen to follow Jesus, mm-hmm. but I love this person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so there's this huge, just grief mm-hmm. to walk through in that. Yes. So you immediately, I know this part of my life, this is just I can't practice, this isn't just it's not gonna work. Mm-hmm. That's just all you know, hey, this isn't gonna work.
For a brief moment, I knew I couldn't do this stuff anymore. Mm. And for a brief moment, I knew these relationships are not what he's designed for me anymore. Mm. But I resisted all of it. Mm. For months I resisted all of it, actually. Right. I had this whole experience with God, yet I was still resisting, and
I think that's important for people to hear.
Yeah.
Because that's not the life you're living today. And mm-hmm. we're going to talk about the freedom that you're walking in and all the things that God's done in you. But you experienced God, and you still said, hey, the cost, and this is something that I think is so important. People talk about the gospel it's cost less. Mm. Just to follow, hey, just pick up your cross and follow him. And your cross is not put on you to deny yourself, to disown who you were.
Yeah.
And is costly. Mm-hmm. Because for you to follow Jesus wasn't just, okay, some of these, this was your community.
Yeah, it was everything.
It was your family. Mm-hmm. Not that you didn't love your family or they weren't around, but it's a totally different relationship.
Yeah.
So you have this whole rhythm of your life. Mm-hmm. You have these communities. You have these places you go for comfort and for compassion and, meaning and romance and all of these things that God did make comfort and compassion and romance.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether or not you were engaging, that it was a counterfeit, mm-hmm. doesn't deny the fact that you were experiencing something.
Absolutely.
So you wrestle for months.
Yeah.
You're I think sometimes we don't give people space to wrestle with the mm-hmm. reality.
Yeah, because it's a process. It's not whereas some people, maybe it is night and day. Some things are changed overnight.
Yeah.
But it wasn't
that
like
wasn't
that
your
for me,
story.
No.
And I think in some things we wrestle with for the rest of our life.
Yeah.
You know,
yeah, sure.
and Zach talks really openly about like his addiction to pornography
Mm-hmm.
and what like, and the more studies come out about what it does to your brain. And we, you know, we asked the Lord, like he's asked God, like, hey, just like radically, God, like restore to me some of the things that are broken. But it has been years of processing and laying things down and asking God, hey, help me transform by the renewing of my mind.
Yeah.
Constantly like coming back through the process of sanctification, which is being made holy. It's just gonna happen until we die.
Yeah.
You know, it's not done.
No.
And my heart is so grieved sometimes when we don't make space for people to wrestle with the Lord.
Yeah.
And we see people wrestle with God, like you're talking about, hey, I have this moment with the Lord, and he's obviously real. You know, like I know what he's asked me to do.
Yeah.
I know he wants me to lay my life down. I don't understand all of the pieces of that, but I know I've got to figure it out.
Yeah.
I rebel. We see, even like, I mean, we see Jacob wrestle with, you know, the Lord, and he comes out with a broken hip, you know, like, or, you know, he's injured. And there's this, I think sometimes we forget when we've spent decades, you know, a lot of times people have spent, you know, 20, 30 years immersed in one thing. When Jesus says, pick up your cross and follow me, some people actually count the cost.
Yeah. Yep.
And it is not costless. People leave their entire communities. They leave their friends. They leave, some of them, like their families hate them.
Yep.
And there's some of them, like there's these, almost like in different communities, there's these unspoken rules of like, hey, it's tolerant if it's the things that we think.
Exactly.
But if it's not our way, it really is the highway. Like, so we can say all day long, well, you're welcome here and we love you and we want you here, until you start dragging some light into those places.
Yeah. And that's for not just one community.
No, it's all, well, dude.
In general.
Utah, I'll talk about some suburban moms all day. You know, they'll get crazy on you.
Yeah.
And so what did it feel like to wrestle?
I mean,
what were some of the things you're considering? Like, if I'm going to follow Jesus, if I'm going to do this God thing,
yeah,
or however you would have articulated it,
yeah.
What were the things you were considering?
You know, wrestling with him, like wrestling with all these things. I mean, it was my identity, or what I was trying to make my identity. You know, the practices, the people, the communities, like you said, even family. I mean, it was my whole life. And I knew that everything that I was being made a new creation, which at that point, you know, I still had it in the back of my mind. You still have to do this and this and this and this and this. You know, you have to do it like they said.
You got to perform.
Yeah, you have to do all of these different things to be able to reach to this point. And it's like I had this whole like spiritual and real encounter.
It defied all the religious things.
Yeah. I was just asking questions. You know,
who were you asking?
God.
Okay,
you know, I'm asking God, like, well, is it okay to be this? Is it okay to do this? Is it okay to...
What do I get to keep?
Yeah. Because I was so desperately holding on. You know, I'm like, I have, this is all I have to hold on to. If I let go of it, then what do I have?
I hear this all the time. So, like, especially when we do a lot of deliverance prayer, people say, well, if I don't have that, I'll have no bottom.
Yeah.
Like, it feels like you won't exist anymore.
Yeah.
If I release this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just hear people describe it like that. Okay, I'm wrestling. If I release this, if I walk away from this, I won't, like, we don't understand what's on the other side.
Right. Yeah. You know, and you're left with him.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the point.
Yes.
But I didn't understand that yet. And so within those few months, you know, I finally come to the realization, okay, this whole polyamory thing, you know, maybe I just need to stick to one person. So I was just with my girlfriend.
So you have these couple of months of wrestling where you're just like, what can I keep? The Lord says, you can't keep any of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And which is difficult to reconcile with. What tell me the moment where you said, okay, I get to the end of these few months. What was the shift for you?
So I ended up making an appointment with my doctor, and I wanted to talk to her. You know, like like I said, I was having panic attacks. I started to have heart palpitations, like all this stuff. They put me on a heart monitor. Like, there was so much going on. You know, she pretty much told me, like, with the monitor and stuff, like, you're good. What's really going on? And then I opened up and told her about all of these things. And she was like, well, let me ask you this. She was like, and maybe I'm stepping over the line here, but, you know, do you believe in God or a higher power or something? I'm like, yeah. I was like, I feel like I don't know if I'm even living, you know, and I felt like I was the Walking Dead pretty much. And, you know, just for the first time, somebody saw me, and it was her. She looked at me and she was like, you're here, you're alive, I see you. Yeah. And I think I know what you need. And so I'm like, okay. And she was like, you think you have to have all the control? And I'm like, well, if I don't have the control, like, who does? Of course I have to have all the control. And she was like, there's only one that has the control, and it's him. And she had asked me if I had been saved. And when I was younger, you know, I said the sinner's prayer, you know, I got baptized, all this stuff, but I didn't understand what I was doing. I did it because I was told that, you know, this is what you do. And so, you know, I told her that, and she was like, she asked if she could pray with me. And so when she prayed with me, I mean, there was so much that I could feel, like, just all of that weight lifted off of me, you know. And she told me, everything that you have, you're going to let it fall, and I'm going to sweep it up when you leave. And so, you know, all these things I was wrestling with, that old life, you were dead. You know, you were dead in your trespasses. Like, you were walking around, you know, not even living, you know, your life. But now here's a new one. Like, here's that new life. And I reached out to a friend that I knew. I knew he had experience in church and stuff, and I knew he was friends with pastors. And I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, listen, so I've had this whole experience, and I'm hungry for the word. Can you tell me what that is? Like, can you tell me what that even means? Like, what's the word, and why am I hungry for it? And he actually had, you know, a come to Jesus whole thing, like, recent to that. Okay. And he was like, I think we need to meet up and talk. He said, because, you know, I found meaning and purpose, and I want to tell you about it. Not that you don't have meaning and purpose, but, you know.
He just wanted to share his story with you.
Yeah. And we had gone through these things, you know. Sleeping with women together. You know, we had done drugs together. We drank.
So your friend had been involved in your life.
Yeah.
And that, like, all the same stuff. He, at some point, just like has an experience of his own. Yeah. So he's not really hanging out with y'all anymore. No. He stops hanging out with y'all.
Yeah. And I hadn't seen him in a while. And so
you knew this guy had some knowledge. So you're just like, this is the only person I know.
And so I reached out, and I was like, look, let's meet. And so we did. And
he shares his story with you.
Yeah, he shares it with me. And he was like, yeah, I know what's going on. And I'm like, well, good, because I don't, you know. And
so good.
Yeah. And I actually asked him, I'm like, what do you recommend? Like, I need advice. Like, is there a church that you recommend? And so, you know, he gave me a list of things. And well, come to find out, my friend that worked at that doctor's office that I went to, she was my best friend at the time. And she was like, so how'd the appointment go? And I was like, girl, let me tell you. I'm like, I'm surprised y'all didn't come in there, you know, to make sure everything was okay. Because I was like scream crying, you know, just going through that deliverance. And so I had asked her, I was like, I know that your daughter goes to church. And I know that you go sometimes. Like, can I go with y'all? And she was like, yeah, of course. And it was actually the Blunt campus that she had went to, and her daughter. And so she took me, and I mean, immediately God was just speaking the whole time. I mean, even walking through, you know, and I was.
But that had to feel, I mean, overwhelming, because you've had this experience as a young woman where you're in the church, you felt unwanted.
Yes.
What did it feel like when you came in this time?
Well, I was so nervous because I'm like, okay, I know what I experienced before. I know it wasn't good. I kind of grouped all Christians into like one category: hateful and, bigoted, oppressive, just completely against me. And so I was really nervous, but I was trusting him. I was like, I don't even know what this means, but I'm going to trust you in it. And so when I went, immediately, and I came in, I was pierced. I had a big bull ring in my nose. I had my cheek pierced. I had all these, my ears were about this big, so I looked different once again, tatted up. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in like this. Yeah. If they like me, they do. If they don't, then they don't. And I was like, but I'm not going to change for anybody. That was my mindset, right? So I had walked in, and people that would otherwise look at me a little weird, almost be afraid of me, they were inviting me in. They were welcoming me. Even a couple, like the second time I came, they knew my name. And I'm like, you cared enough to know my name? You cared enough to hug me and tell me that you love me as I'm coming in. And this was in the first week that I started going.
You don't even know these people, and they're telling you they love you?
Yeah. I'm like, who are you? Like, what? Oh, wait until you really know me. Like, and so as I was going in, I was having these encounters with people, like his love through them, even though I looked the way that I did. And they didn't know that I was still with a woman at the time. And so that was like that one last thing that, I was holding on to and kind of afraid of opening up with people. And this was around Pride Month, too. And so it was really nerve-wracking at that time to go in there, but I had a completely different experience than I had before. And even Zach and Chris, it was back and forth. I'm pretty sure it was the first time that I went, it was Chris doing his sermon, and the next time it was Zach, and they were talking about sexual immorality. And as soon as they started talking about that, I'm like, here we go. I'm like, oh great, and then I just remember like feeling like, give it a chance. Like, don't be so critical and don't be so offended right off the bat. Just listen. So, my ears were open. And for the first time, in my old experiences, it was, we're just going to point out homosexuality as sexual sin and only put our finger on that one, only point our finger at those people. But it wasn't like that with Zach and Chris. They talked about homosexuality, but they talked about heterosexual immorality as well. Yeah. And so as they were talking about that, I was like, you're not just pointing your finger just at me. You're talking about all sin, not just this. Because that's been such a focus, in the world, is almost holding that on a pedestal, But really...
Well, and to say, hey, just because you desire for something, you're not necessarily in sin. Yeah. What you do with your desire is what matters. Yeah. And so there may be things that you want to do, but because we're called to deny ourselves. Right. Yeah. Everybody's got some sort of something that they want, and it's worth saying, just like you're talking about, like, the cost to follow Jesus for some is different than others. Yeah. Yeah. And to have compassion and know, like, hey, everybody's got something. And our job as the church is to love people where they are. Yeah. To meet them where they are and recognize the things that they are leaving behind for Jesus, and show them where that's satisfied in Christ and in the body versus leaving them to fend for themselves. Well, glad you chose to follow Jesus. So glad. See, figure it out. But that's not what was done to you.
No. Well, and everybody has an object of idolatry. And, mine just may have been a little bit different than somebody else's. And that's something that, they were showing me, like you said, that doesn't mean that you're actually sinful. At that time I was, I was still, partaking, and I wasn't denying, anything, I was still holding on. Like I said, there was that resistance. But even the time before I had came, like I think it was maybe the second time that I had stepped in there, I met Sheila.
I love Sheila.
Yeah. I met her and Lisa. They had a small group, and they actually invited me. And I mean, Sheila, I'm like, this lady, like.
Sheila's an older woman, older and very Southern.
Yeah.
Southern woman. She's the kind of lady who will make moonshine. We'll just put it that way. We love Sheila.
Yeah. But I was like, are you sure you want me to come into your small group?
Because this is different. This is an old white Southern white woman is inviting you. You've got all your stuffs on.
Yeah, all my stuff.
And she says, I want you to come to my group.
Yeah, she invited me in, and typically I'm like, I don't know anybody. I came to church because I knew someone here, and I was like, I don't know, because I tend to be pretty shy, but I said, you know what, I'm gonna go. It's gonna be okay. And so I did. I went, and it was like I walked in and I felt like I knew them. Like I wasn't nervous. I mean, a little anxious, just like anticipating being there. But when I met with them, I'm like, I feel like I've known y'all, I've always known you
Divine
guys.
flow.
Yeah. And so, again, that was kind of during Pride Month, and that kind of came up in discussion.
Yeah.
And I didn't tell Sheila, I didn't tell anybody, where I was still. And so they were having these discussions, and it was one of those things, just like when I was in church when I had just recently gone to church, hearing these things and the finger not just pointed at me. When they started talking about pride, I was like, oh, okay, like what are they going to say? Kind of just like sitting back and, not saying much and just kind of getting the feel of everything. And they started talking about it, and they were talking about like, look, we don't condone these acts.
Yeah.
But we aren't going to condemn these people. We don't agree with them and what they're doing, but we're supposed to still love them. I'm like, hold on. Because when they said that, I'm like, then that means they love me, that they still love me, even if they don't agree with me. And in the world teaches us that, if someone doesn't agree with you, if they don't affirm you, if they don't support everything that you're doing, that they just hate you. It's just an automatic, oh, they hate you.
Yeah.
And that's not true.
Yeah.
But that's the mindset that I had, because that's what I was fed.
Yeah.
And so coming into this space.
And some of your experience.
Yeah. And it was my experience. But coming into the space, where, again, I looked different, I was different, I acted different. And then the people that I was around, like, I had that, this is who they are, but then they were showing different to me. Like, they weren't, saying, oh, these gays, or they're going to hell. Like, just, they weren't like that. And that was my experience before, just people in disgust of me. But they never explained, in the past, they never explained to me why this was sinful, why, this was leading me down the wrong path. It was just, you're an abomination, you're going to hell, you're not allowed to be in this space with us. But for the first time I was actually in this space, and they were saying something different. They weren't compromising scripture at all. They weren't compromising. But, it's like, if we're going to tell the truth and, be that light in people's lives, like, we don't compromise the word. We don't condone what they're doing. But if we're going to tell the truth, we have to do it with love and compassion and mercy. And I was seeing that, like, in real time happening around me. And so as they were saying that, like, I didn't say anything. I was just kind of listening. After that day, I just sat in my car, and I was on my way home, and I was like, I feel like I can trust them enough. Maybe not the next week, but later on, I feel like I can trust them enough to open up with, what I'm doing, or like where I'm at, and that's what's so important. Like, a lot of people meet, not just people who are in homosexuality, just within anything, they're automatically met with, hey, don't do that. You shouldn't do that. You can't do that, but it's so important to build a relationship, to build a relationship with somebody before you start talking about who they're sleeping with, because, with just anyone,
Ooh.
With just anyone, you're not going to talk about that in the first conversation, maybe, but for me, that made the difference, that I was invited in and that they started to build these relationships with me. And it was before they knew, but I started to trust people, and I had always had trust issues, obviously because of my experiences and because of what the enemy was feeding me. But I was like, hearing these conversations without them even knowing that I'm part of what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Hearing these conversations and how they're addressing it, like, I've never had anybody address it like that. And so it made it easier for me to open up and to trust them. And then I started asking, those questions to God, like, God, okay, we are to deny ourselves. We are to pick up our crosses. We are to die to that flesh and go your way and not our way. What does that look like? Like, I got to a point where I'm like, I'm ready to go your way, and not my way. Like, I want what you want for me in my life instead of what I want. Like, I know what I want.
Yeah.
I had my whole future planned out, with this girl. And we were in talks of like moving in together. Like, it was this whole thing. I was like, I know what I want. So I started asking those questions. Is it okay to be gay? Is this what you want for me?
Yeah.
Is this where you want me? And so as I was asking those questions, he started responding, And again, I think sometimes we ask questions and we expect a certain answer, and then we get upset when it's not the answer we want. But also, when we ask certain questions, we expect to answer when we want them to, and it's not always when we want. It was another thing. I was sitting in my room, and he showed me, he was like, I want to show you what real love is. You've had this worldly definition of love. Certain communities have told you what love is, but that's a false sense of community, a false sense of love. Like, that's
your
not what
community had a definition.
Yeah.
Your girlfriends, your boyfriends, they all had a definition. Your family has a definition.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I know what it is, and I want to show you.
Yeah. And so it was like I was just sitting there, and it was just pouring out. And I'm like, it was hard to comprehend because my whole life I thought this was what love was. Not even just with other women, like you said, with family, with friends, with boyfriends, girlfriends. And it was nothing like that.
Well, I feel like what we've done so much is we've built up this idol of marriage and relationship and things, and we say, well, this is the only thing that can satisfy that part of you.
Yeah.
When in reality, the greatest thing is to know and like be loved by Jesus.
Yeah.
Like, there are people who are single for the rest of their life. There are people who, who do get married there, and none of those, like, there's nothing promised regarding desires. Like, some people have their desires removed from them. Like, they follow Jesus and they're like, hey, I never lusted after someone in the same sex again. And there's some people like, hey, I struggled the rest of my life, and I love so much, like, hey, I had never experienced this. Like, this thing satisfied my soul like nothing else can. So good.
Yeah. And he's like, so as he was pouring that love out and showing me, his love, not just through other people, but in that moment in my room when he was pouring that out, he showed me, like, look, you love her, but if you love her, you'll give her back to me. And I'm like, but what does that mean? And then, it's just, if you love her, you'll give her back to me. You love her, but you have to love me more. And I realized, like, you have to be my everything. I've made people, places, things my everything, but you ultimately have to be my everything. Like, I really do have to let go of all the things, my whole entire life, lay it all down, And, we were talking about counting the cost. Like, that was the biggest and hardest thing to let go of, because, not only was she my girlfriend, but, I had relationships in between. I was dating her in high school. We broke up, had relationships in between. I had even gotten married to another woman, and then went through a divorce because there was things in that. But we came back around to each other and we started dating again. But in that period, we had been friends, for years. We had still been friends. So not only was I letting go of a relationship with her, but I was letting go of a potentially letting go of my best friend, my friendship with her. And that was the hardest thing, because it's like, okay, I can let go of this relationship, Lord, even though that's still extremely hard. But what if I lose her altogether? I want to be her friend. I want her to be my friend. And we were friends for so long. And so you're asking me to let go. That may mean that she won't be in my life anymore. And I told him, I was like, look, I will do whatever it is that you ask me to do. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do it. I will, because I want to be in obedience to you. But I ask one thing. I was like, and I'm not trying to negotiate or anything here, but I do ask one thing. If this is what you're calling me to do, make it as peaceful as possible. Just make it peaceful for her, make it peaceful for me. And, I ended up calling her, and she knew. She was like, I already know. I'm like, what do you mean you already know? And she was like, I already know. And so we didn't talk for months. She eventually come back and was like, look, I need to go away because I knew it wasn't personal.
Yeah.
She said, and don't take this the wrong way, but she was like, can I tell you something? She was like, it's so weird for me to say this, because I thought this would just ruin me, because you're what I wanted. I'm what you wanted. She said, but as this happened and I stepped back and I, knew it's not personal, I felt a peace that I can't explain. And I was like, it was him. I was like, that's what I asked for, and that was a conversation we had. This was 2 years ago, or maybe a little over a year ago. She's not in my life anymore, and I did lose that friendship. But I know that he's working on her too. And so I'm happy for that, and just praying for her that, he reaches her, and, but knowing that she had a peace, and that she didn't feel betrayed because she knew it wasn't personal. But even just with like my friendships, leaving out of this community, coming in, and that's something that we really need to understand, because there's a mass exodus out of the LGBT. Like, I have seen it. There's like a mass exodus, and these people are leaving this community, all that they've known for most of their lives, and they're in search for another community. And just like I left this community. I left everything and everyone behind, and a lot of people left me too, because they heard, oh, you're talking about Jesus. Okay, well, I don't want anything to do with you, because I know about them people. Yeah. Even though I'm like, but I'm not acting like how other people have treated us. They still didn't want anything to do with me. So I lost friends. I lost family. I lost, a partner. I lost all of it. But that's that was part of counting the cost. And, but what I gained from that was, I gained, true love, knowing what true love is. I gained, a protector and a provider, and somebody who, just embraced me and walks with me. I gained the ultimate best friend, and sometimes it's still hard, because even surrounded by people, sometimes I still feel alone, Yes. And, he's always there like, hey, you're not, I'm right here. Yeah. But, I still feel like that sometimes. And
the desire for companionship.
Yeah. Yes. And he did take those attractions away from me eventually, and those desires away from me. But it wasn't overnight, And then when I started opening up to the group, they they embraced me even more. And so it was just so important that, you know, as these people, as myself, came out of this community and is in search for another community, you know, we have to be open and receptive to them, you know, and show that compassion and that mercy and, you know, that love, his love. And sometimes we have to take a step back from ourselves, and because even me, you know, even me, like coming out of this community, sometimes I look at what's going on and that rage wants to come up. Like, I just want to shake people. Like, look what the enemy's doing. Like, it's not real, you know, and I feel what's real. I know what's real now. And it really does make me whole and fulfills me. And all of this over here, it never will. It's all temporary. But he's forever. He's eternal.
Well, and so you have to work to maintain compassion.
Yes.
And mercy.
Yeah. Even.
And I left it.
Even out. Yeah.
Right.
You know. And so, like, he's even worked on me because, you know, sometimes I know that I've come into certain spaces where when they find out about my story, you know, some people are open and receptive of and allowing me to come into these spaces because I'm no longer that.
Gosh, that's good.
You know? And it's like, you have to love me. We have to love each other because he's called us to love each other, not just because they're not gay anymore. You know, and I feel like there are some people I have met, like, I only love you because you're not gay anymore. And it's like, no, you have to love me for me, you know, for who he's created.
Well, gosh, and what would your life be today had those women not loved you?
Yeah.
With all your rings and all your tattoos and your girlfriend.
Yeah.
Like right where I was. And that's so, man, I hope if you're listening, like, you're just encouraged. Like, there's three things I always pray that people hear. When anybody hears your story, I pray there's three things that they hear. One is that God can meet anybody, anywhere, anytime.
Oh, yes.
The Holy Spirit is active and moving,
and
he desires for people to know him. And two is that it's, as a Christ follower, my job is to create a place where anybody can be broken and anybody can ask a question, and I can be present and love them there. I don't have to compromise the word.
Right.
I don't have to dishonor the Lord. But I can create a place where it's safe to come sit at my table in my living room, at my table at Chick-fil-A, you know, and ask a question. And the third thing is that it is, for most people, and for me, for you, following Jesus did not happen overnight.
No.
It was a process of counting the cost and slowly taking steps toward holiness, and that journey is not done. You literally just said, hey, he's still working on me. And so we love, like, you know, when you start, like, hey, like, I still have friends who are gay who would say, hey, like, for queer men and women, say, hey, like, that's how I would describe myself. Like, our job as believers is to still love people. It doesn't mean that we have to agree. It doesn't mean we have to participate, but it does mean that we have to be kind. You know, love is patient, and create a space where people can be hungry for the spiritual and find the real thing instead of the counterfeit. So, man, I'm so grateful, Christina, for your time today, for your story, and we're grateful for you guys. Remember, like, you've been called to win your world. You have a purpose, and I hope that today you were reminded how big and great and beautiful and satisfying God is. And that's why we share our story. It is not to modify people's behavior into compliance.
No.
It is to introduce them to the one who has satisfied our soul. What a wonderful thing. So we love you. We're grateful for you, and we'll see you here next time.